I say this for every video. Every aspect of this is kind of challenging. This is no different. When we start talking about deconstructing and taking apart basically all of the toxic ideas that we've internalized about ourselves, I don't know, I guess it becomes very super personal, and also you're like talking about things that you may not necessarily want, like feel particularly comfortable about, like everybody knowing. There are people out there who would love to have a list of the things that I am the most insecure about. This video is not for them. I still think this is a really, really important part of burnout, so we're gonna talk about it. It's actually one of the things that just happened. It just started happening to me, and I think that this is actually kind of like my brain is going in a million different directions. This is kind of where like trauma that's trapped in the body meets the reason why. A lot of times when we get that diagnosis, or we, come to the realization of our identity, which doesn't require a diagnosis, then all of the pieces start to make sense in terms of you start to see the bigger picture of how all of this works and how that's probably not so great for us as a society as a whole. I've been trying to figure out what to call this because, like, is it discernment? No, so for me, I like to call it like spitting out the poison or something along those lines, like getting out the poison, like processing the toxic, getting it out. Welcome, I'm Amber. I'm autistic and ADHD. Just went through 3 years of burnout while trying to still be a parent and keep a marriage together. And if you've watched any of my other series, any of the parts of the series, or any of my other videos about my experiences, I hope that this is also helpful. It bears repeating. The more we talk about this, the more that we're present, the more that we express ourselves, the more we can help, the more that we can be out there invisible in a way that then we can actually maybe do something or not, like maybe just for ourselves. You're also autistic and ADHD. I love you guys. I really do. You guys leave the best comments, always. And they're always so sweet and always like so like personal, but in like such a sweet way. I read them all. I'm so glad that my experiences have resonated with you all. There's consent here, so if you don't like it and you don't resonate, that's okay. You don't have to take it. Okay, so let's move on. People are probably going to have very strong opinions about this stuff. And honestly, I think more importantly, we just really need to focus on how these structures and systems have harmed us. I feel like when we really truly understand that, then we can actually begin to understand how it has done that to other people, because those two things are incredibly related to each other. Our ability to relate to others is also intertwined with that. This is not a space to debate whether or not toxic systems of oppression actually exist. If you don't know about those things yet, there are plenty of places for you to find them. It's 2024. There's plenty of resources from people who are better capable of being able to educate you on what they are. We're just going to be talking about them existing and the impact that has on people. I think there are multiple levels getting the poison out. There are the things that your family told you that are just flat out wrong or toxic or harmful. I don't want to use certain words. I gotta be very careful here because otherwise, like, this platform doesn't like what I say. There is definitely a widespread conformist, neuronormative, like conforming, like system overall, and it requires different roles of different people based upon their positioning in what we would consider, some people like to call it hierarchy, but it's also just racist, like it's also just white supremacy. And I told you we were going to be talking about this stuff, so if you are getting in any way uncomfortable and you don't have the capacity to stay for this, wow, you need to go. I don't have space anymore to carry and hold for people who don't want to acknowledge these things anymore. I don't. We're not doing that. We're not going to take the harm and the pain of so many people and just completely completely ignore it, because honestly, and I think that this is what we've been told for so long, right? That's what we should have been paying attention to this whole time, because it is everything. I am incredibly grateful to the Black, brown, and indigenous people who have taken their time to, and it's hard to process and continuously speak about these experiences. I'm internally grateful for the people who have tried tirelessly to tell us that like everything is about white supremacy, even ableism, like everything is. It is all that triangle, right? It sucks. It is so awful. And so for me, at least, I could not process my own experiences and the toxicity of the things that I had internalized until, and as well as processing and understanding what other people have been oppressed by, because you're only getting a tiny little piece of it. It's like narrow vision. If you're not looking at everything, and it makes a lot more sense when you see all of it, right? It makes a lot more sense when you see all of it. So I guess I'll start by talking about my experiences. Like, it's so hard now sometimes to kind of go back and remember, because I'm realizing that it's like starting to like fade in and out in terms of like what happened. But I had already been pretty intensely seeking out content from people who are not white to understand, because I've just always wanted to know. I've always wanted to know the unspoken stories, and I always felt like it was really important to understand those stories. Have I been fantastic at it? No. Have I, been great at the responsibility of understanding it? Probably not. Like, I think most of us probably could do more. And so I was seeing a lot more content about people talking about things. I think it wasn't until I got my diagnosis and I started, like, it really did feel like I was like processing like this poison. Like, it really felt like it wasn't, and it's hard to tell when it's in you, what's you and what is that. And so it's called, I like to call it conditioning, right? It's the conditioning of these systems that want us to behave and be a certain way that's most effective to whatever they are trying to accomplish, which oftentimes involves rich people at the top getting richer. And it just was like a constant unfolding of like, oh my God, like the whole time, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like unbelievable, but also totally believable. And it was like, I think there had been so long where I just didn't understood. I didn't have the whole story, and that's intentional. I probably still don't have the whole story. I'm still looking and, learning and everything. But like, there's just so much that we're not told and that we're just told to do that absolutely 100% isn't good for us, feels really bad. And we need to learn the difference between that and whatever that is and whatever people wanted you to be and whatever they told you had to be, and like who you actually are and what you actually need. And so it's really about getting all of that out so it's not influencing anymore your sense of justice, your sense of what's right, your sense of what's safe, your sense of what you need, your sense of boundaries. What the heck is the point of doing something that someone else told you to do if it's not even like either sustainable or even good for you? Like, it's not, like, these things aren't good for us. So it's okay for us to find out what is. On top of that, I think it's also really important that we just understand how all of this works, because how on earth can we navigate, maneuver ourselves, and try to work towards something better if we don't even know? A lot of this was really just me reading things, understanding experiences from other people who like for instance, Black women who are also autistic, who also have their own ideas and their own experiences, because it can often be very, very different than what white women experience because of racism, because of the way that this works, and because of our positioning. One of the books that really touched me and like really opened my eyes was Rest is Resistance, partly because it resonated with me, but also because it was a very clear education on, like, I think there was a very important moment where I realized that this was an experience that wasn't mine also. Started to change me into realizing that I was going to need to learn to be able to hold like multiple realities at the same time, because we're not all living the same life, we're not all experiencing the same things. That's only going to serve you in like you know, like the world we want to be in and the things that we want to exist in. And like if I could say anything, like the skills that I care most about right now are conflict resolution, holding multiple realities at the same time. Those two especially are incredibly useful. Learning discernment was also like a big part of this. So a lot of getting out the toxic, getting out the poison was also about like, so like you saw my other video where I talked about like coming back to yourself and taking care of yourself and loving yourself. Once you have that, once that's stronger, then you can start to use that as, when you like start, you know, really looking at what works, you can start to develop an internal compass of sorts where, or at least that's what I did. I like started to develop an internal compass of like, okay, whenever there's external forces, like, or external things happening, then you can start to develop and kind of hone in on being able to tell the difference between that toxic conditioning and like what's really truly right and good and all that stuff, as well as for yourself. So there's actually some work you have to do, because you can't just entirely base everything just on you, right? Because we don't live isolated in a world. We live in a world with a lot of people and a lot of different experiences. But I think that there is something that we, especially as autistic and ADHD people, sometimes, I don't think it's that we miss it. I think it's that who we are innately when we're growing up is just not accepted, and so we kind of forget like that sense of like what is really truly just and what is not, and like when people are trying to mess with us and when they're actually genuine. And so it does take time. It takes time to develop that skill, but I do think, at least for me, I was able to develop it and to trust it and to understand it, and you kind of cross-check it as you go. So like, you know, at first you sometimes jump to conclusions and stuff, and then you find out that it wasn't that at all, and then you're like, okay, all right, fair. There's a lot of humbling moments, but then over time you really do start to trust yourself more. I really think actually that the point of all of this, the way that, you know, it's externally set up, is really just an extraction of labor from us. And the more they can make us uncomfortable or forget, honestly, the more they can make us forget that we are people, that we are human, and that we have to take care of ourselves, the more they can get us to do things past our limit. And that's actually part of the reason why it's really important to see this when you're in burnout, because you're going to have to look at and see all of the ways that these systems, these various different aspects of your life, are set up so that not only are they not authentic to who you are, but they also kind of it's very transactional rather than replenishing and like all of the things that actually like give us energy, make us feel good. It's very, very, very isolating on purpose. It's very very much meant to be like, if you don't check all of these boxes, then you can't be in the club. And and I think the point of this at the end of the day really is just to like try to get you to do things that serve other people's purposes rather than your own. And so for me, I mean, one of my biggest core wounds was the feeling of belonging, because, you know, I'd had to leave my parents at the age of 2 or 3, somewhere around there. I don't know. It was kind of messy. But like, so I didn't really ever feel, and they were very young, and I don't really think they had thought anything through. I was a surprise. So like, I think I had some very, very deep feelings about not really feeling like I belong. And I think that a lot of autistic people feel that way. We just feel like we don't belong. And that's because we tend to operate differently, and a lot of social settings don't like us. Why? Because we don't tend to fit into how stuff works. We can talk about the fact that a lot of the times when we don't like what those things are, it's because they're actually not great and they don't feel good, but that's another story, or we can talk about it now, but like, and I lost it. Like, I lost my train of thought. This is gonna happen a lot. Thank God for editing. That's all I have to say. I'm just gonna wait. I'll wait for a second and see if it comes back. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. So yeah, so like, there was so much that I had to look at externally in my life in terms of all these different arenas. Like, for instance, for parenting, it was like, oh, it's actually impossible to be a super mom. like it's actually impossible. And also, like, do I need to wear the mom uniform, or can I be myself? Like, it was way too exhausting to try to be some external version of what everybody thought a mom should be. It was just way too stressful, and I couldn't do it. Like in burnout especially, like I was like, okay, well, maybe then you can just find out that it's okay to be you. And that's exactly what happened. My kids actually really like it when I'm myself, believe it or not. And when I'm honest and I'm like, you know what, I can't really do that right now, honey. I'm not feeling great, or I'm feeling a little tired. What else can we do instead? Or how about can you give me like 20 minutes? And they've gotten really good at learning how to respect those boundaries. But if I had never set them to begin with, if I had just been an overgiver, which is totally a thing that women especially are pressured to do in this society, especially mothers, it's like overgive, it's never enough, you always have to do more, you're never enough. And I just didn't want to deal with that. I saw that as doing so much harm to me and who I was. So that was like kind of how in parenting, I just sort of had to like be like, okay, do you have to do like all of these things that you feel pressured to do because society says that makes a good mom? And that was really eye-opening, because I realized, no, I don't actually. A lot of the things are just like external things and not the actual thing. Like, the point is to connect and support and love your children through their, progressing through their ages and stuff like that. Like, it's just to be there for them and to be a family with them, to be in connection and community with them. We really had to take apart so much of the ideas about marriage, because like they were just a lot, honestly. I realized that, again, I was doing this thing where I was like, I have to be the perfect wife. And I think I can't even say that now, because I'm like, oh my God, that's so gross. I'm not perfect, and I have messed up. I messed up in my 20s. I feel like everybody has messed up somehow. And I really had to go through, and I not only had to like take responsibility for the mistakes that I had made, but I also grace. I had to give myself some grace and some compassion. And also learn to be myself, because I was like, what is the point of not being myself in my own relationship? Like, who is this person even in love with? And that honestly was kind of scary. That was really scary, because I was like, nope, I'm gonna be myself. And if this marriage is based on something that isn't even who I am, then I'm gonna have to face that. And like, I can tell you, I can reassure you that actually wasn't the case in that situation. But I had to be prepared for the fact that like maybe this is like, I was really worried. I was like, is this marriage just based on the mask that I had presented, or is it based upon me being a good enough, highly toxic version of whatever a wife is supposed to be? Or is it real? But the beauty is that I found out that it actually is like real, and that was actually really quite sweet. I'm like gonna cry a little bit. And not only that, I think there's a quote going around somewhere that talks about this. I'm so glad my brain's finally starting to move. Talking about how like we're so much better when we're our weird little selves, and that like those are the parts that people love about us. And so like, yes, I think that one of the hardest parts about being in a marriage, when you start out masking, or you're trying to conform, or you're trying to behave, and you're doing the stuff like the external toxic stuff, is that if you're established for a long time, like we've been married for like 16 years, 14 years or whatever, then you have to start over, and that can be extremely destabilizing. But at the same time, it's like jumping off a cliff a little bit. Like it really is, because at some point there was just a part of me that was like, I need to know if I'm being loved for me though. I feel like that's really important to unpack and to find out, because otherwise what are you doing? So those were two really big areas of my life where I started to see the toxic systems versus toxic systems, toxic structures, just the external expectations and conformist expectations versus me and who I was, and what actually felt good and what felt grounding and what felt authentic to who I was. And I started to really much more prefer the authentic part of me, rather than this constant need to like prove yourself, which is absolutely one of those systems, right? Prove yourself, but then like also it's like impossible to ever get there without like so much sacrifice of like who you innately are. It's like, okay, well then what are you even winning? Like what are you even succeeding at when you do that? Like, so like my work also, so like even my creative stuff, it's like so caught up with proving myself. And again, coming back to what I was saying before, I finally came back. This deep wound, this like deep desire, this deep need to belong, I feel like had absolutely presented itself multiple times throughout my life in terms of like, what are you willing to give up in order to belong? And I started to realize that I didn't have to do that. Like it wasn't a given, and that was a huge mindset shift. It was like, wait a minute, I don't have to give up who I am in order to belong, and I should actually not give up who I am in order to belong. And if I'm in spaces like that, I don't know, that kind of does not seem healthy, like at all, or good for a person. Yeah, there was a lot of that, because I just really wanted to belong somewhere, and had many moments where people would give me conditional love. They would give me conditions as to how I could be loved, how I could belong. And at some point, I think I developed enough personal strength and internal love and care to recognize that I wasn't willing to sacrifice myself anymore just so that I could please people, fit in, conform, or do or be or not question things that really truly did not seem right to me, or felt like they were not right to me, or like if someone was trying to cross my boundaries, or and I had communicated that and they still were doing it, and it became all about how I was being too sensitive or whatever. It was like, no, I'm not willing to push past what matters to me in order to have people. I want to have people in my life who understand and want to know that is how I wish to be loved. That is how I need to be loved. And that if if I'm nothing but a fix-it-up project to them, then that's not truly belonging. And that doesn't mean that we don't like, you know, that we aren't always like learning and growing, but like this requirement that we must learn and grow according to standards of other people, I'm not sure it gets us very far, I guess is my point. I feel like we do much better when we are inspired from within to want to do these things because they feel better, because they are more aligned with who we are, etc. There were definitely massive trauma responses when I realized that there were things that I was like realizing like that I had been forced to be okay with that I was not okay with. Like I would have like shaking and like meltdowns that were like less, they were like a lot more about a particular thing that was unjust and unfair, and I would just sit there and I would, you know, freak out and I would get it all out and I would say it, and then I'd usually at the end come to like some conclusion. It was very cathartic, and I just started to believe that like, oh, okay, that's just getting it out, you know? That's just releasing it, because then it doesn't have to be in you anymore. Like I can just hear a bunch of people saying, yeah, okay, well that's all nice and well and good, but like what about being out in the real world? Because the real world still exists the way it does, and it's still hugely ableist and all these other things, and it still requires all of this stuff. And that is a fair point. We still have to exist in a lot of these toxic structures. I personally feel like unpacking it from myself and removing it from myself and making it something that's out there was better than me feeling like I was embodying these things, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it's still hard. There's a lot of stuff to do. There's a lot of work we have to do. There's a lot of things to dismantle and a lot of things that we need to create, quite frankly, instead. I'm a parent. I still have to be out in the world. I still had to be out in the world the entire time that I had burnout. I you know, had to go to dentist appointments. I had to go to doctor appointments. I had to go to school things. For a while there, I couldn't go to the school things. They were very, very strange at some points about me not being at the school functions. And then there's the, you know, the worry of like, oh, are people going to judge you and your parenting because you're in burnout? Because no one cares as a parent if you're burnt out. They just, like, it just becomes all about like, are you performing well enough? Like, are you taking care of your children? Are you meeting their needs? No one's ever like, man, she's really, really burnt out. Is she okay? Like, can we help her? Like, just from my experience. So anyway, yeah, no, I'm definitely not saying that there aren't like a ton of things that we still have to be in and exist within. What was burning me out more was like ascribing to those things, believing in those things, the pressure to be someone other than me, the pressure to overwork myself for something that I wasn't aligned with. I went and I decided that I was going to tackle the things that I did have some control over, and that as I recovered, then it would go out into places like advocating for my children at, you know, in the school system and stuff like that. But yeah, we are definitely very much limited by whatever it is that actually exists right now. However, we're not limited by what could be. I know that sounds like incredibly cheesy, but that's how I feel. I've been through enough. I don't mind being hopeful. I'm not really as social as I used to be. I have not yet found like community that I really feel like I belong to, and I'm not even sure if that's a thing. Like, yeah, I don't know yet. I think that socially speaking, I just burnt out on trying to have meaningful connections with other people. I feel like probably I'm not alone in that, in terms of like with like other autistic and ADHD people. Like, we just go through so much social trauma and rejection that it just gets to the point where like any little tiny thing is like re-triggering that, and it gets really, really hard. But again, maybe that'll be another video in the future if I ever figure it out. I do know that our isolation is not going to help us much, but I think there are many ways that we can form community. And I think that we can start to build them in ways that are not conformist and hierarchical, and the ways that have been deeply hurtful to us. So anyway, I think that's all I've got the energy for today. There's probably things that I've left out. I would say that this kind of process of like going through and like understanding and seeing like the external versus the internal is like a thing that you have to apply to pretty much everything. You are literally learning who you are, sometimes like for the first time. Anyway, I hope again that this was helpful. I'm probably gonna have one more video in this series about burnout, because we're gonna talk about my experience with medications, which honestly, and other things. I think that one's going to be really helpful and really important, because I feel like that was like the last final push that like really got me back into a place that felt better. Discernment and this kind of stuff is also like probably going to be a thing for throughout my life, because I'm always going to be learning. We're always going to be trying to build something better, right? Within ourselves and outside. So anyway, stay tuned for next time, and I don't know, drink some water, take care of yourself, love yourself, bye.